without any further ado, Cindy Russell.
Thank you. You know, every time I've done a few programs before, and I find out that every time I do a program, there are usually people who come to the program who know a lot more about the subject that I'm trying to do the program than I do. So this is just a collection of the history of the East Newark School District and as many photographs and newspaper articles and things that I could find, and some wonderful interviews with a couple of people who were kind enough to talk with me, and so I kind of put it all together. But if I've made some mistakes or you know something that I don't know, please let me know. So I call this program Roosevelt School, More Than Just a Building. Well, what would bring over 100 people of all ages out on a freezing cold day to be part of saying goodbye to Roosevelt School and to pose for one last photograph? Behind the assembled group stood an aging yellow brick building that had long since ceased to serve any function. It had been vacant for years, now an eyesore, and it was time for it to go. But for everyone who felt compelled to come that day, there was a sense that the demolition of Roosevelt School meant wiping out something central to their personal stories of growing up, coming of age, or being of a place at some time in their lives. Neighborhood schools have always anchored communities. Roosevelt School and its place in East Newark's history is no exception. In the early 1800s, East Newark was a small, thriving canal town known as Lockville because of the 3 locks on the Erie Canal that existed in close proximity. It was a bustling place, and it had its own character. Most business was actually done there, a mile east of Miller's Basin, and there was a belief that the population would continue to settle in that vicinity. Instead, it trended westward to Miller's Basin. Lockville eventually became known as Arcadia, and Miller's Basin as Newark, and in 1853 it marked the incorporation and consolidation of Arcadia, East Newark, and Miller's Basin, now known as Newark proper, with the 2 towns combining to form the village of Newark. In 1844, Newark had within its boundaries 4 common schoolhouses that existed and functioned independently. Probably the earliest was located in what was known as Ninham or Groats Corners, in the vicinity of where Maple Avenue is today. By the mid-19th century, it was called District Number 9. New York Central Railroad Station, or the New York Central Depot School, in what we would know as the Lincoln area, was known as District 24, later became 17, and that was in the northern part of the village. And the school in East Newark or Lockville was called Arcadia District Number 18. And then there was a school on the northeast corner of the present Church Street and East Avenue, which was the Newark Union School and Academy, District 8. There were several attempts to unite the districts, but they weren't successful. Around 1850, District 9, the West Maple Avenue Schoolhouse, was dissolved, and it united with District Number 8. The main school on Church Street. But North Central Depot and Lockville remained independent common schools. Now, the East Newark Schoolhouse of the mid-1800s replaced what was an earlier frame building, and it was located on Church Street, and the arrow on the right, the arrow on the left is where the Roosevelt School was eventually built. It was a 2-room schoolhouse. It was made of brick, as were many of the buildings in East Newark, due to the local brickmaking factory, and it was located at the end of Church Street. 2 teachers taught as many as 108 students, and they were divided into 2 classes, a junior and a senior division, and the building still exists today. Here's a class from 1894 from the East Newark School. They all have short hair. I wonder if there was like some sort of a outbreak of lice or something, you know. It's possible, but they don't look very happy, do they? But now, interestingly enough, the school is still at the East Newark Schoolhouse still exists today, at the end of right there where it was at the end of Church Street. And I think it's a 2-family apartment house now. And Chris Davis pointed out too, if you drive down there and you look at the window at the top of the peak there, you can see the chimney sticking up through from the original schoolhouse. And of course, you can see the windows on the side and when the door turned into a window. Well, in 1910, School Commissioner Albert H. McMurray of the Second Wayne Commissioner District, he dissolved 17 and 18, and he annexed them to District Number 8. And that finally united all the territory that was the original 4 school districts, and it created a ward school system. In August of 1910, the 3 former districts met as a board, and it was at this meeting that it was decided to build a new school in the North Ward on the west side of North Main Street at a grand total cost of $20,000. In 1911, the East Ward School was declared by the State Education Department to be unsuitable for further use for school purposes. Taxpayers voted on May 10, 1911, to build a new school in East Newark at a cost not to exceed $18,000, and to purchase a new site at a cost not to exceed $3,500, and also to hire an architect to design the new building. There was a great deal of debate regarding the proposed location and its cost for the new East Ward School. Some favored building the school at the same location as the Church Street School, arguing it wasn't necessary to add to the price of a new school with a land purchase, while most favored the large lot that could be available fronting East Union Street. And you can see that lot there by Kyler and Union and, what is that, Church, Vienna? And Church.
Yeah.
It was thought that the Union Street location, while needing considerable work in terms of moving buildings and bringing in fill dirt, which was eventually trucked in from Asylum Hill, would offer a magnificent site for a new school of which everyone could be proud. There was also anticipation at the time that there would be a building boom due to increased factory sites in East Newark and the trolley and railroad lines that ran through, and that a fine school would be an important feature for not only present but future families and growth. In December of 1911, the Board of Education formally authorized the purchase of land at the new site for an additional $6,000 above the $3,500 original price, and to build the new school, East Ward School, again not to exceed the cost of $18,000. The same architect from Watertown, who had been chosen to design the North Ward School, was selected to design the East Ward School. Enrollment at that time in East Newark was 58 students, and they had been transferred to the Arcadia Hose Company building until a new building could be completed. Well, with the parcel of land being secured and preparation of the lot undertaken, and with the Arcadia Engine House was moved across the street east of the Brunswick Hotel to clear the site, shops and houses were demolished, 2 houses were moved, one to Kyler Street and one to Church Street, and construction was begun on the East Ward School. In a ceremony of June 20th, 1912, the cornerstone of the new East Ward School was laid by William J. Bronk, a trustee of the Board of Education. A considerable number of citizens attended who wanted to be able to say in future years to the coming generations that they were among those who saw the formal laying of the cornerstone. John Zorno summarized the contents of the school's cornerstone as containing a box with papers that described what led to the building, some local newspapers, and a shiny new Lincoln penny. At the time of demolition, efforts were made 2 years ago. Efforts were made to retrieve the cornerstone box, but it could not be located. I think John, if I'm correct, believes that maybe it was most likely covered over or removed when the cafeteria was added to the school in 1957, but it was not located. The trowel used that day was silver-plated and presented to be preserved by Mr. Bronk as a much-valued memento of the day. And fortunately, someone donated that, relatives of William J. Bronk donated that to the museum, and it's on display. You can see that over there on the table. So we have that as an artifact in the museum. So with some delays in construction, the building opened, I believe, in the late winter of 1913. It opened a little later than it was supposed to. And interestingly, it only utilized 2 classrooms and 2 teachers. It was the same configuration as the old schoolhouse, and it housed students in grades 1 through 8. The first principal teacher of the new school was Nellie Drake, and teacher Bertha Kelly. Elementary-age children were now housed in the East and the North Ward schools, as well as the Union School. In 1915, the first of several traditions was established, with the first annual transfer of flags being held with representatives from each of the 3 schools. There's an early photo. This is from 1923. I don't know if you can read the names. I know your names there. Well, by 1919, enrollments were increasing throughout Newark at a very rapid rate. Crowded conditions at the Union Grammar School and underutilization of the East Ward School resulted in the changing of boundary lines of the ward schools. So over a lot of resistance and heated discussions by the residents in the affected areas regarding territorial objections, which included dire warnings of children having to cross railroad tracks to attend another school, the Board of Education in August of 1919 changed the ward school boundary lines. Children east of Prospect Street, from Cooper Street and eastward now would attend the East Newark School. It was at that time that $2,100 was appropriated by the Board of Education to complete the construction and the furnishing of the 2 unfinished classrooms in the East Newark School, which had been operating with using only 2 classrooms. And Emma Paul was named the principal of the East Ward School. We have an early photo. Well, in April of 1920, the schools were officially renamed by the Board of Education. In March of that year, it had been a suggestion of Mrs. Edith Van Tassel, Secretary to the Superintendent of Schools, to name the schools after presidents. Students were involved in voting to name their schools, and the East Newark School officially became known from then on as Roosevelt School, named after President Theodore Roosevelt. Well, by 1921, Roosevelt School utilized 6 rooms, 1 included as an assembly hall. The grade configuration was now through 7th grade. In October of that year, the DAR presented each building with a 48-star American flag and a presidential portrait. Today, the Lincoln portrait, I know, still hangs in Lincoln School. The Washington portrait is now in Perkins School. It can be assumed that the Roosevelt portrait would have hung prominently in the building, but I don't know if anyone remembers if it did or where it was or what became of the portrait of Theodore Roosevelt. Kindergartens were added in all 3 schools by 1923. And enrollment figures for 1924 were Roosevelt 208, Lincoln 263, Washington Grammar 508, and the high school 285. It was apparent that an elementary school was needed in the western area of Newark, and in 1926, Perkins School was constructed, returning the configuration of the original common schools dating back to 1844. For the next 40 years, the phrase Perkins, Lincoln, Roosevelt was usually spoken in conjunction with elementary education in Newark. Some of the things that were going on in the school at the time. I'm not sure which trees, though. I don't know if these could have been the big trees out in the very front of the building that were dedicated. Or in 1928, to better meet the needs of students in both Roosevelt and Lincoln School, and to provide them with equal facilities, because now there was the beautiful new Perkins School with a gym and a combination gym and auditorium. Additions were approved for both buildings, providing increased classrooms, bathrooms, and a combination gymnasium and assembly rooms. Carl Ade, the architect for Perkins School, was hired to design the addition for Roosevelt and Lincoln. And see what was added to Roosevelt. This is from it's later because the cafeteria is added on there, but you can see where I put the arrows. That was the addition to Roosevelt School. It's basically almost like a second school behind the first school, whereas Lincoln's School, they added side by side, so interesting. And you can see a photo from the old, and then the Roosevelt that everyone remembers with the addition. You had to look pretty closely, but you could see a little change in color in the brick. And, we also have that at the museum, the plaque. So what was Roosevelt School like for a student in the 1920s and the early 1930s? In 1990, Christine Terrell Krollman, who was Newark class of 1940 and is pictured in that photograph as a student at Roosevelt, wrote her recollections of attending Roosevelt School, kindergarten through 6th grade, from 1927 to 1932. I'll just read a few portions of it. It's a charming little vignette which preserves the memories of her time there. Memories of Roosevelt School, Christine Terrell. The days in Miss Marion Rose's kindergarten and Miss Anna Fort Miller's 1st grade are vague. No doubt there are those who have dear thoughts and memories. Those 2 years must have been comparatively pleasant years to have faded so completely into the past. Was it in 2nd grade with Miss Bertha Kelly? When we started having the circles and straight lines that Miss Bertha O'Hara would patiently endeavor to teach us in order that we could accomplish the Palmer method of penmanship. Does Dick Chase still curve his left hand when writing? Certainly we all recall straight-backed Miss Elizabeth Lansing in 3rd grade, who would insist we push shoulders way back in order to bring in enough fresh air into our lungs to stimulate our learning powers. Sweet Miss Nina Hedden tried desperately to teach us how to recreate nature's foliage on paper with crayons and watercolors. Going on to Miss Eva Wilder's for grade 4, brought on long division, other realizations that we were advancing in education. Miss Florence Bain, with her pitch pipe and her me, would bring forth more giggles from the girls and squirming from the red-faced boys than it would sweet music. When did we start going to Ike Tierson's store for our pennies? The big jawbreakers and the strips of black and red licorice. There were long decisions on what to choose. We tried to select a quantity of something so we could share with our friends. How many trips were made to the wastebasket with our previous huge wads of bubble gum? Do you remember the weekly visits to school nurse Miss Emma McCabe? We were required to turn grubby stained hands top to bottom and stoically pause while she fingered through our hair looking for animal life. Mr. Daniels, the janitor, always had a pleasant word. The black stockings and bloomers, topped by iron midi blouses and black ties, obviously stated that the girls were to have gym that day with Miss Schramm. And the cold, blustery winter winds would howl as they came down over State School Hill. Our book bags became vehicles to make the last final swoop down Church Street into the schoolyard. The rubber tube in E.J. Hockbruckner's office was an ever-present threat. Was it in Miss Edna Mildon's 5th grade when classmate Ellen Maynard decided to be a playwright, director, and producer of Little Women? There was always the solemnity of Superintendent F. Straub's visits and the berating we would endure from our current teacher if we did not behave. Are we more appreciative of good music today because we listen to weekly concerts on the radio by Walter Damrosch? His commentary was most technical. The school children earned American flags and marched from Roosevelt to East Newark Cemetery each Memorial Day. The reward of an ice cream cone was double if ambitious walkers joined another band-led march from the Central Park to North Main Cemetery. And the 5-cent ice cream treat from our teacher on the last day of school each year climaxed many happy days. Weren't we pleased and just a little awed to receive our promotion certificates from 6th grade, to anticipate going to Washington school, junior high, a new way of life with Lincoln Perkins School graduates. So the three buildings, this was from a school brochure in 1933. Beautiful, all three buildings. Some of the things going on in the 30s, the teachers, record registrations. This photo was donated by Wayne Williams, who attended Roosevelt School in the 1940s, beginning in the 4th grade with his 3 brothers, as did his wife Marlene DeBout and her sister. When interviewed for the Daily Messenger by Laura Olmette, he recalled teachers, the principal, and the school nurse, whom they described good-naturedly as resembling the illustration from the old maid cards, and who drove a 1940s Chevrolet coupe. Miss McCabe seems to have left quite an impression on students. With continuing expanded enrollments and a high school increasingly inadequate to meet the needs of Newark's student population, a new senior high school on West Miller Street was approved and opened its doors to grades 8 through 12 in 1941. Friendly and not-so-friendly rivalries existed among the 3 schools in sports and field day competitions. From time to time, improvements were made in heating, ventilation systems at Roosevelt, adding additional playground equipment. The area behind Roosevelt School was paved to provide safer busing. The school really did serve as an anchor and a point of pride for East Newark, now with what had become generational attendance. Beginning with the Child Welfare League and then the PTA, Roosevelt had always boasted strong parent involvement. That little heading up at the top, that was usually what was in the newspaper with the school news, Perkins Lincoln Roosevelt School Notes. Parent involvement was especially true in the 50s. East Newark felt a particular point of pride in 1953 when Mrs. Murray Bergman, who had been an active member of the Roosevelt PTA, was elected to the Newark School Board. She was the first East Newark representative to serve on the board in 18 years. We have some photos that were donated by, these are from Jane Allen, 2nd grade. I think Jane's on the right, standing up. I think that's Jane. It's Halby's 3rd grade at the library. Linda Day Donaldson. This was one of her photos. She's in the front row in the middle. I think the two girls to the left must be twins. Look at the shorts. But then it looks like the one on the end on the left has the top. I don't know. Love them. Just a few more, just newspaper things that were happening. 1957, the final addition was made to Roosevelt School. It was a cafeteria, and it cost $66,000. Remember, the original building cost $18,000? It was intended to be able to seat 100 students at each of the 3 lunch shifts. A cafeteria was also added to Perkins School, and the basement of Lincoln School was renovated as a cafeteria. With burgeoning enrollments, the district was moving forward with plans to construct a new high school. Enrollments continued to climb, and in the fall of 1958, with the opening of the new Newark Senior High School, the 6th grades from the 3 elementary schools were transferred to what was now the junior high school, and so that left Roosevelt as a K-5 building. By 1961, as we went into the 60s, the 5th grades were now moved out of Roosevelt. Enrollments continued to climb, and at the end of the decade, the new Norman R. Kelly School opened in September of 1969, and the enrollment of the Newark Public Schools hit a record high of 3,228. Perkins, Lincoln, and Roosevelt schools now became K-3 buildings, in which Roosevelt would remain until 1976. Some of the things going on. Finally, probably to the relief of many, from what I know, Edward Bruckner, is that how you pronounce it? Yeah. He retired after many years as principal. Some of the activities that went on in the 60s. Anybody remember a gas boiler explosion at carnivals? Wendy Tallier Caffey was a third grader at Roosevelt School that year in she was 66 to, what's that, 66 to 70 or 69 to 70? Yeah. And she attended the school through third grade from kindergarten. And Wendy sat down with me and she shared just a few memories of attending Roosevelt School from 1966 to 1970, just little everyday kind of things that she remembered about going to school at Roosevelt.
It's the back doors. And we had to wait until I think a bell rang before we could actually go into the building. Mm-hmm. So some kids played sports, some kids goofed around. And first grade, the first day of first grade, I believe it was Valerie Castleman and I had the exact same brand new outfit. And we kind of hid in the corner because we were afraid of the older kids. And we waited until the bell so we could go in. So we became best friends that year. About not going in the front door, mm-hmm. because I think that we had a barrier. It was not a physical barrier, but it was you could not go past this point. So you were not allowed around the grassy area around the front of the building unless you were with your class. Mm-hmm. So we were lynched in. And there was a playground there. And plus the hill, it wasn't much of a hill, but in the winter we sledded down it. In the summer or whatever, we rolled down it. So
would that have been behind the building?
Between that and church.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. Between the drive parking, the bus area, and Church Street, yeah.
You were naming some of the people that you kind of remembered and recognized? And
Miss Sears in that picture from second grade, and this one, third grade. I could not find kindergarten and first. I don't know where they are, but yes, there's some names come to mind fairly quickly. Bonnie Sosha and Judy Kukular and Valerie Castleman and Lee Powers and yeah, and Chris Mahar. So some names do come, some don't.
You showed me a little change, a little purse there.
This is my little change purse that I carried probably my nickel for milk in, and it probably had a chain at one time, and I put raisins in it, so there's a little stain of a raisin there, and that never came out.
Isn't it funny the things we keep?
And the little cafeteria downstairs. I did get in trouble down there once. Got in trouble.
What'd you do?
Well, my friends were goofing around, and you know how dangerous it is to pull chairs out when somebody goes to sit down. Well, somebody did it. I don't even remember who, but we got in trouble. We had to go stand with our heads against the wall, against the cinder block wall. My mom was not pleased. So,
the cafeteria is down in the basement.
Yes. Yeah, that little addition off the side.
The addition.
Mm-hmm. And I always brought my lunch. Mm-hmm. And I remember ho-hos came in 2 packs, but Mom would only give us 1, so she wrapped a ho-ho in aluminum foil. So I only had 1, and probably a peanut butter and jelly and those kind of things. Oh, and peanut butter and fluff. Peanut butter and fluffernutter. That was the big thing, yes. And I do remember, we wore a lot of dresses, of course, and well, we had to wear leggings, and when it was cold out. So Mom would safety pin the leggings to my underwear. Well, that just made the underwear fall down too. So it was all day long, pulling up the leggings and the underwear. I believe it was Michael Rady. We were all walking down the stairs, headed somewhere, and maybe upstairs, I don't know. And then all of a sudden we hear, Michael! And Michael Rady went down between the stairwell, right down the middle. And I believe he was not hurt. He must have bounced. I don't know. But I don't know. I mean, I think he was back in school. He didn't hurt himself somehow, but everybody yelled, you know, when he went down through between the stairs. And third grade, I think it might have been part of what we were doing in third grade, but I opened my bank account in Columbia Bank, the first savings account. I still have that book somewhere, my first little passbook. Joined the Brownies in third grade. So I'm not sure who the teacher was, but we did a lot, I think. Yes, this was, what grade was this? This was third grade. So this was St. Patrick's Day, and I had nothing green to wear. So I was all upset in the morning. Mom, I don't have anything green to wear. She very quickly cut out some green felt in the shape of the shamrock and a little white pipe and put a little safety pin on the back, and I had something green. So I was happy for my photo, you know. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting the things we remember, isn't it? We probably all have those kinds of memories. Well, by the mid-1970s, enrollments were now shifting downward, and it was a downward trend, and with tightening budgets contributed to the decision to close one of the elementary schools. And it was determined that for economical reasons, Roosevelt, being the smallest and the lowest enrollment, would be closed at the end of the 1976 school year. In 1965, a young first-year teacher, fresh out of college at SUNY Geneseo, had begun her teaching career at Roosevelt School. Eileen Godfrey taught there for the next 10 years until the school closed in 1976. She then continued at Perkins School, retiring in 1999 after 34 years of teaching. Eileen was kind enough to sit down with me and share some of her recollection about her years at Roosevelt. Well, before we get to that, I forgot I had a couple of slides in the middle here. I guess Jack Gilbrath was the principal. Galbraith, is that Galbraith? Yeah, Galbraith, yeah. Quits to paint houses. But probably a little misleading. But and then Bob Linehan, who was the last principal at Lincoln School. He was at Lincoln School too, but he was at Roosevelt School. And here's Eileen. All right, well, thanks for sitting down with me today.
You're welcome.
Talking about, and also thank you very much, because I know you were instrumental in the photo and getting, you know, when we talked about getting a photo, I knew that you had taught at Roosevelt, and I said to Chris, contact Eileen, you know, and maybe we can get somebody who taught there and maybe a student. And then you had the idea to kind of put it out there, and it was really a wonderful turnout. I was amazed. I was amazed. So.
I was too.
Yeah.
Pinky and I came down Vienna Road, and I said, this could be a real bust. I said, it could be just you and me. But then when we got down there and saw all the cars, I said, oh my gosh.
I know. I had trouble finding a place to park.
Yes, we did too.
It was a wonderful.
But it was great. It was.
Yeah. Which kind of made me think that to try to do a program about Roosevelt, it might be nice to kind of preserve some of the memories. I know there were newspaper articles, and I know you talked with Laurel and Matt in the Finger Lakes Times. That was a nice article. But I thought if we could kind of capture some of those, that would be kind of
yes,
fun.
it would be.
All right. So I guess my first question would be, how did you happen to start your career in Newark? I know it was your first job, right?
Yep, it was my first job, and I had sent out interviews, you know, to go to interviews and stuff at the college in Geneseo. They had a board, and it said, you know, they needed a kindergarten teacher, so I interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Kelly came to Geneseo.
Oh, he came.
And he interviewed me there and said, would you like to come back to see the school? So I said yes. And my friend that was my roommate, she got an interview in Canandaigua. So I dropped her off in Canandaigua, came on to Newark, had my interview, and they said I could have the job, so I picked her up, and she said, I got the job too. So we went back to college, and we both had jobs.
That's so good. What was your first impression of Roosevelt and the building? Do you remember?
Well, it was old, but I had gone to a school in Attica, my old hometown, that was well, my school was bigger than that because it was K through 12, but it was an old building. That didn't bother me. And besides, I just couldn't wait to be a teacher.
So you started out with kindergarten, and that was when it was still split session, half day kindergarten. So,
Correct.
so probably the entire time you were at Roosevelt, you taught like a morning and an afternoon.
I did.
I think I read 10 years, 20 classes, right?
Yep.
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 Remember about what the class size was?
Well, when I got there, they told me that the class size was right around 18 to 20. I thought, well, I could handle that.
Yeah, right.
Well, that first year, it must have been that there was a big influx of children born 5 years before that, because there was like 30-some. There was 32, I think, in each class. So there was many children.
32 in each class.
Yes.
So
yes.
you were working with 64 children a day.
Yes. I remember telling the principal one day, I said, you know, I don't think I'm coming back tomorrow. I'll just take the day off. He said, what do you mean? I am just so tired. There's just so many children. And it was shortly after that they started thinking about getting aides for kindergarten. Because it wasn't just me, it was Doris Canute over at Lincoln, and probably at Perkins too. But I know we just had a lot of children.
They were just so not.
They just, I don't know if they came out of the woodwork or what, but when I talked to the teacher that was at the school when I was interviewing, she just said that was what it was. It was a small group. But maybe it was that year, and the following year it was not. And then we had it like that for quite a few years. And then toward the end there, it got really small again.
Okay, so inside the building, where was your classroom? Because I was never in Roosevelt other than just the gym part once. But so. Kind of the configuration of.
Well, if you came in the back door, you would go downstairs to go to the gym.
Okay.
If you came up the stairs, the first door on the right was the kindergarten, which was very handy for the children.
Right, so basically the first floor.
First floor, yeah.
Because I think way back many years ago, I think the kindergarten was in the basement. Somebody told me, I don't know if there was a classroom. But that would have been quite a few years.
The cafeteria was down there, and the boiler room was down there, and there was an art room was down there.
Okay, so they did have an art room and a music room, or shared maybe.
It could be a music room.
Yeah, but no library. Yeah. There was never really a library.
No, we had classroom libraries. Okay. Yeah, and I think the first floor had the kindergarten, and it had a second grade and 2 first grades. I think that's what it was. First, second. Yes. And then above me there was a second grade, a third grade, a fourth grade, another third grade, I think. So there were 2 of each, 2 fourths, 2 thirds, 2 seconds, and 2 firsts.
So at that time it was going through 4th grade. I think 5th grade had been moved out in about 1961 or something like that. They had done something with 5th grade. So it was down to 4th. It was down. Yeah. Originally I think it was up through 6th grade and then down to 5th and then so about 4th grade. But by the time you left, by the time Roosevelt closed, it was only maybe up to 3rd grade, wasn't it? I can't remember.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think maybe
because Kelly had
been built.
And so
it was just.
And Kelly was just a 4th and 5th, so it was still.
Right.
So, where was the principal's office?
It was on the 2nd floor, so you had to go all the way up. And where my room was on, as you came in the door and up the stairs, you'd have to go up the stairs again, and then down the hallway down, because the building was built around the gym.
Okay.
So it was a gym auditorium all together, and it was on the other side.
All the way around.
All the way around.
Nice distance, right?
Yeah.
Who was the principal?
Jack Galbraith.
Okay, and you're probably.
And the secretary was Bill Ridley.
Okay. And how about he retired though? So who was the principal at the end?
After that was Bob Linehan.
Bob Linehan. Okay, I remember Bob.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So When you started at Roosevelt, you and I were talking earlier, and you mentioned that all the teachers seemed older.
No, I'm old. Much older than they were, I'm sure. But yes.
It was an older faculty.
It was an older faculty. But they were so nice to me. They were very, after the first day of school, well, at lunchtime, I had one class gone and the next class was coming, and they said, I said, wow, I did it. And they said, yeah, you did fine. And I said, well, I don't know about that. And they said, nobody was crying. We didn't hear anybody crying. And that was their thing. Apparently there was a lot of crying. But there had also been a lot of teachers that had come and got pregnant and left and that kind of thing. So I was new to the district there.
Yeah.
So.
But then some younger teachers came.
Yes, then the special teachers, the extra teachers, because they traveled between the elementary schools, and the gym teacher for both, well, for the boys and then for the girls, and then also the art teacher and the music teacher and the speech teacher.
Okay, so those are familiar names to anybody who's been in Newark. There was Gary Miller.
Correct.
And Pinky Tebow.
Yes.
And Linda Brondo.
Yes.
And Sue Colasino.
Yes.
And I know Anna Mullins was there. I don't know if she was there.
In the very beginning, it was Marlia Brigham.
Okay.
But Anna might have come later on too.
And interestingly, all those people stayed for their
we did.
For their
I didn't
entire
even thought
career.
about that, but we did. We all stayed.
So they're very familiar names, but they got their start at
got
their start at Roosevelt. Do you remember, were there any kind of like maybe special traditions or any things that kind of made Roosevelt unique, do you think? Or any favorite memories that you have from the time there?
I've been thinking about that, and I don't kind of remember. Maybe it was because I taught kindergarten and I was kind of out of it with the rest of it, but we didn't.
For one reason or another, right?
We didn't go to a lot of the programs and stuff like that. But,
I know you mentioned in the newspaper article about the Halloween.
Yes.
You participated in the Halloween and probably all the parties and the special kinds of things and
it was new to me because I remembered Halloween when I was a child, and I couldn't wait for a party. Well, by the time I got through one of them, I went down to have lunch, and the cafeteria ladies were so nice. I'd never had iced tea before, but it was hot, and boy, I said, yeah, I'll have some. Well, now I'm an iced tea drinker. But they just said, it's just... It takes a lot to get through all this, and it was getting the children into the costumes, out of the costumes, all in 2.5 hours.
Well, I think overall, too, I think that there wasn't as much direction or guidance in some ways as there is today in terms of here's what you need to do, and sometimes it's so structured now. But I think for a new teacher that's really had to have been really overwhelming because it's kind of like, well, here you go.
Yep.
So, I didn't mean to ask you, the busing, I mean, did most of the people, there had to have been by that point, but there were children who still walked to school at that point.
I had the afternoon children all walked, and the morning children took the bus.
That was how it was structured. Okay.
And Lincoln School was really overflowing, so that was how I got an extra group of children that came from that area over to me. And I also got their parents, because they obviously wanted them, I didn't know at the time, but they obviously wanted them to go to Lincoln School and wondered, who the heck I was and why they were coming over there. But once they came and we got used to things, I think it all worked out okay. But it was different for them too. But then we had special bus drivers, special for kindergartens, and they were really good. Muriel Burrell, remember that?
Yes, certainly.
And, I can't think of the other names. They were a husband and wife team. Oh, well, maybe I'll think of it eventually.
I mean,
Somebody else will.
Yeah,
Somebody else will be able to tell you at the program you have, I'm sure.
right. Well, I think that's the thing too with like a neighborhood school like that.
Yes.
I think it becomes I think that's why it was such a loss to East Newark, because I think it was kind of the center of the community, and every, that existed at Roosevelt. I think it exists at Lincoln and Perkins, and people feel very connected, and that's kind of the anchor there. So.
Well, I go by there now and I can't imagine, but when we came out, we went out to the playground, and there was, a street on every side of that building, and you just said, go and play, and you didn't worry about it, and they did not run into the street. They
managed to stay on the playground.
And we also had a wonderful person on the corner to direct the children across the street. And one of the traditions that I didn't forget was that they went across the street to the little store that was over there, and everybody got a popsicle at the end of school.
And that had to have been a long tradition, because I think I read about that happening many years before.
It was. I think it was because the people that ran it when I was there were, I think, the daughter and son-in-law of the people who owned it before, and their children went to Roosevelt School too.
So you were there at Roosevelt for 10 years, and when the building closed in 1976,
yes,
I read that there really wasn't much notice at all, that it kind of came as a complete surprise to staff and everyone, and so I kind of wondered if that was, if people were surprised, if anybody saw that coming, and what the feeling was when that happened.
I think we were all surprised, and I think that we did hear that it was a possibility, but I don't think we ever dreamed it really was going to happen.
I mean, enrollment was probably down, but it was still, it was still.
It was down, but now when you think about it, it would have been lovely to have 20 children in a class.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
but we all, each of the teachers, as far as I know, we all got a job. We all got a job within the district, and that was a blessing.
So, was there any kind of final thing at the last day of school or anything, or did everybody just kind of? I know that announcement came out in May, from what I've read and what I've read in the papers. So there was a lot of distress, and I know there were a lot of people in the community were understandably very upset, and there was a lot of unhappiness about that happening, but it seems like the district, they pretty much made up their mind that they could save money and move everybody, and so
apparently,
so there wasn't any big goodbye ceremony or anything when the building closed.
It was kind of get yourself ready to move all your stuff wherever you were going to go, and we were all being split up. Even the assistant that I had was sent to a different school.
Really, you weren't able to keep your assistant?
No, she went to Lincoln and I went to Perkins.
Oh, that's good. So you went on to Perkins.
I went on to Perkins.
You
stayed there.
Stayed there, kindergarten all the way, right? And you retired after 34 years, right?
Yep.
That's a lot of children.
And I worked with Mary Jo Fernine and Doreen Doucette, and lots of other little people that once Mary Jo went on to first grade, we got lots of other people. So it was kind of nice to work with someone else rather than always being by myself too.
So I wonder, is there anything else? Anything else that I'm trying to think if there's anything else?
I can't think of anything. I did ask to have a sink put in the room that I had, because I was always going out and washing the paints out, or sending the children out with dirty hands to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, we can't do that. And I said, well, we're right next to the bathroom. I'll take one of the, because we used to have the kind of closets that you pull down. You pull the doors down. And I said, we just won't pull that one door down. It will be just fine.
And they did it.
And they did it. They did it. So I think that the next group that came in after me, the Roosevelt School, they knew whenever I'd say, were you in my room? There was a sink in the room. Oh, yep, we know that room.
Yeah.
So.
But the building was well kept at all times.
Oh yes, the floors were sparkling when we come in the fall, and they took really good care of the building.
So did you ever imagine in 1965 that you'd spend your entire teaching career in Newark?
No,
teaching
but it
just worked.
It just worked that way. I had different friends who said, "Aren't you going to leave?" And I said, "No." I liked what I was doing. Yeah. And I enjoyed the people, especially at Roosevelt, the families that I got to know. I still know some of them. And I can go by the houses on the way up the street there, on Church Street, and see the different places that they invited me home for lunch, because in those days, you sent them home about 11:15. You did not start again until 1 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
So there was a long time. So sometimes I go home with them and have lunch and then come back.
Kind of a different
and it was
world.
nice.
Yes, very nice.
And there was a PTA, and let's see, Shirley May helped me with. She was the head of that. We'd often have, before school started, we would have like a kindergarten tea. And invite the parents and give them an idea of what it was going to be like. Yeah. So,
well, thank you very much. So
you're welcome.
Here we are, sitting together.
Yep. Well,
55 years later, you and I are. So,
well,
but it's wonderful. It's wonderful for to be able to kind of share those memories.
Yeah.
I think it's important. It's important to preserve. It's important to preserve.
Well, they're very important to me.
Okay.
Because that's where I started. So, Perkins will always be where I end, but Roosevelt has a special place.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank Eileen so much for doing that video. Well, during the last year, 1975-76, and it was felt that the classes could be absorbed in the two other buildings at a savings of about $40,000 for the district. So there were many strong feelings expressed by the members of East Newark about, they ranged from people being angry to just being sad, for whom by now many generations of their families had attended Roosevelt. But ultimately, there was resignation with the knowledge that probably whatever assurances and good intentions being expressed to maintain an aging building or find another use for it, Roosevelt School would probably not be saved from the effects of abandonment. Following Roosevelt's closing in 1976, efforts were made to find a use for the now closed school. The school district sold the building to the Village of Newark in May of 1977 for $1. The Alex Eli Community Center utilized it for several years for programs and activities. And in 1977, it became the home of the Wayne County ARC program. Since this was almost 45 years ago, and I realized it when people came for the photo 2 years ago, for some, this is what they think of when they remember the old Roosevelt School. The building housed the program until the completion of its new facility on Roosevelt Children's Center on Pearson Avenue, and carrying on the Roosevelt name. The Roosevelt School was never utilized after 1993. The contents of the building were sold, disposed of at an auction in 1994. When enrollments went up and schools were once again crowded not so many years later, Some questioned the wisdom of having closed the building or why consideration was not given to buying it back and reopening it. But its size, age, and the necessity to meet new code regulations were reasons it could never be considered to be viable again as an elementary school. And so the building was left to deteriorate for the next 25 years until its demolition in 2019. A few still wished it could have been saved, but the ravages of time and neglect were too great. And so for a few days, 2 years ago, many came to watch as the Roosevelt School was reduced to rubble to make way for a new burned dairy. The burned dairy also with lots of activity. But the sound of children is long since gone and replaced mostly now by the sound of traffic. So I hope you learned a few things today about the history of Roosevelt School you might not have known. I certainly did. Or something maybe jogged a memory if you attended the school as a youngster or if you had relatives who did. And I'm sure many of you know things, as I said at the beginning, many of you know things about Roosevelt that I did not include or know about. But I hope the program that I put together encourages people to help preserve Roosevelt's history by sharing photos, memories, or memorabilia. The following are just newspaper photos that I found through the years. So I guess I would say in conclusion, what I learned in doing this program today, as I looked through photos and searched newspaper archives and talked with people, it reinforced to me that local schools fulfill an important function on life's journey. They orient us to our own histories. They're anchors of continuity in the places where we were from. Schools are where, as children, we first learn how to interact with our communities in official and personal ways and capacities. And they offer a touchstone to reconnect with it way down the line. Our schools are signposts in the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and our communities. So when someone is asked, what school, elementary school did you go to? If the answer is, I went to Roosevelt, it carries with it all sorts of local meaning about just who you were and who you knew. And that's why, for so many, it was more than just a building. Thank you. That's the end.